Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello, everybody. This is Ciappelli on ITSP Magazine. The show that I am hosting today is my baby. My favorite show is Redefining Society podcast. And what I do here, I muse on the relationship between society and technology and the other way around, because it's not just a one-way street. It goes both ways. Today, we are talking about a book that is not out yet, from what I understand. And the author is here. He has a long story, history with technology. And this touch actually on something that is familiar with my theme. I usually talk about dystopia and utopia. And the book is called The New Technology State, How Our Digital Dreams Became Societal Nightmares. So there is a little bit of, touch, I think, on utopia, dystopia, and probably the reality will be in the middle. But I'm not the author. The author is with me. He's Dr. William James Raduchel. I try to understand how to pronounce this before, and we went into phonetics and all of this, and I'm sure I didn't give the right pronunciation. So Bill, I'm calling you Bill, if it's okay with you. Welcome to the show. Please tell me how badly I pronounce your name, and tell a little bit about yourself to our audience.
Thanks, Marco. I've learned to accept in a long life and career many pronunciations. So normally I would do Raduchel, but don't worry about it.
Raduchel. Okay.
So I grew up with technology. I was 15 when I saw my first computer, and it was a huge machine used to fire anti-aircraft missiles against Soviet bombers. It was at K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base in Michigan, and I got hooked, and I have been following computers ever since then. And I'm now 77, so that's 62 years of growing up with technology. And I've seen it from when it was completely, nascent, when you could do very little with it, but what you could do seemed magical at the time, to everything we've seen today. I originally was an economist, and economics got me into statistics, and statistics got me into computing, because that's how you did it. And eventually I became more a technologist than anything else. And I grew up with tech, and I've seen it. And I've been chief technology officer at AOL Time Warner was my last job. I was chief strategy officer for Sun Microsystems before that. I understand tech. I've implemented it. I've done huge systems, and I understand software. I've written, lots and lots of code over the years. And what I remember from my days at Harvard, where I got my PhD, is I taught with John Kenneth Galbraith in his class, The New Industrial State. And one of the things that he said repeatedly was that the global elite would use technology to gain wealth and power. Well, guess what? That was said in the mid-60s, and 60 years later, he was right. And that is exactly what has happened. And I had this observation, and I thought about it a lot. But one day I was having just a conversation with Paul Dacre. And Paul Dacre in the UK, people would know, he was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail. And most people would have considered him at the time to have been the fourth, fifth, or sixth most powerful person in Britain, because millions of people read his views every single day and were influenced by them. And he was taking me through, getting me to talk about technology and how it was changing and where it came from. And he paused suddenly, and he looked at me, and he goes, Bill, this means revolution. And that society can't handle this amount of change this fast. And, he may be right. I mean, change is becoming faster and faster. And when Galbraith wrote, technology change meant hardware. And it took years to go do. But today it's software. One person can go write software that changes the world. I mean, Google Maps is one person. I mean, there's some earlier inventions, but you're changing the world and just one person can go do it. So the pace of change is going up, not down.
Yeah.
And that's hard for people to handle. My economic history professor at Harvard gave us a trick question one day. He said, what was the most important technology to enable the Industrial Revolution in Britain? And being good students, we guessed the steam engine, the railroad, and all sorts of things. He said, nah, it was the gin still. The Industrial Revolution made people so stressed that you couldn't brew enough beer to get everybody drunk who needed to get drunk every night. And it was only by increasing the efficiency of making alcohol with the gin still that the revolution could occur. Now, I mean, he was an esteemed professor, Alexander Gerschenkrom, but it's the same kind of thing. I mean, we are stretching society in all ways, and we've ended up in a society in which we are now very efficient but fragile. We are united but divided, and we are increasingly unequal.
So there is so much. I'm going to stop you here. There is so much already packing, 3 minutes of your conversation, and it's inevitable that it is like that. I mean, every time I talk about it, even my show itself, I had to adapt the abstract for it. Now it's more about the fact that I am saying that this divider between the real world and the virtual hybrid digital world that we live in, it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we pretend that there is this, but we are living our life online. We're living our life on social media. AI is already everywhere. And people think that they need to realize that it's more pervasive than what we think it is. But I think that one of the things that I would like to ask you is, with the quotes from John Kenneth Galbraith that you mentioned before, how much of that has become true because we ignore the alerts and alarms of people that in the 60s were telling us that, or is because it's kind of inevitable that society is going to make more beer and that's how we deal with the future?
Well, I mean, the reason it took a book is because I don't believe there's one thing that did this, Marco. What it is, it's the cumulative effect of a lot of things, including the way the stock market works, including reforms in the United States in the 80s to tie executive compensation very closely to stock price. It's the fact that we have a very fragile stock market in which a few pennies in earnings per share can mean hundreds of billions of dollars in valuation gain or lost. And it's the fact that we assume that lots of people can write software when in fact very few can. I mean, when I was running, a big programming shop in the 90s, there was an accepted rule of thumb in the industry that maybe only 10,000 great programmers existed at any one time. Maybe it's 20,000 or 30,000 today, but it's not millions. It's tens of thousands, and almost all of them work for the top 5 tech companies because they can afford to pay them the money that they're worth. And other companies have trouble doing that. I mean, I think that if you look at the future, almost every company is going to end up looking like a professional sports team with players and employees. And the players get paid enormously because they're that valuable. The advantage that pro sports has is I know whether you're a great player. I see it on the court or the field, the rink, and I can see that you're worth that. But I don't see that with software. And so companies have trouble paying people what they may in fact be worth, but the big tech companies understand it. And they go off and recruit these people, they pay them, they coddle them, they give them the things, and they have it. I mean, one of the things I read an article on a year ago is that the Vikings had 1,000 steel swords. And one Viking had gone to Iran or Iraq, somewhere in that area, and it brought back the ability to make steel. And so they found about 1,000 steel swords that they had. But if you have an iron sword and I have a steel sword, you're going to lose because I can cut your iron sword in half. And the Vikings conquered the world on 1,000 steel swords. And this is what the tech companies have done. They've gotten the great programmers, and the great programmers aren't better by 20%. They're better by 200% or 300%, maybe even more. There was a story about a columnist in the Silicon Valley, well known, Robert Scoble, who went down to SpaceX. And one of the things he asked to do was to interview the team that wrote the software that took a rocket into the sky and then landed it back on the landing pad. And they said, well, okay, it's over here. He's here. And they go, what do you mean? I want to see the team. And they go, well, there was only one person. And I mean, that's the 1,000 steel swords, right? And these brilliant programmers that go and create it, there are lots of people then who build derivative stuff around it. But it's thousands of people, and they provide the cutting edge. Well, so then that drives what Ricardo would have called economic rents into the people who hold them or manage them, and the big tech companies go out and recruit them, and that's where they are. I mean, they make double, triple, quadruple what they make elsewhere, and so they're able to pay them a lot of money, but it's way below the value they produce, so it's very worthwhile.
So to run a parallel and to make you use a few very interesting and easy to understand metaphor. I mean, the Vikings with the knowledge, one knowledge that changed the course of history in that particular period of history. I like the idea of the running as a sport team, but the difference is that, as you said, people do understand basketball, they understand soccer, they understand football, while in the technology industry, they use what they produce, the masses, but they don't understand it. So it's hard to even evaluate, not only from a financial perspective, but also from what change it is making to our society, the knowledge that they have in their hands. So am I getting somewhere here in creating more divide because of knowledge and power and money eventually?
I mean, anybody who flies will occasionally, and if the airplane you're on has seat back entertainment, occasionally they have to restart it. And you should just look at that screen, and it goes on for 2 or 3 minutes, and it teaches you the amount of technology. I mean, we talk in software all the time about stacks, and it's now a very complicated stack, and you see it at the top, and computer scientists would call it an abstraction layer, and you see that abstraction layer, it's your phone, and you can figure out how to understand it, but what's below it is just layer and layer and layer of very complicated technology, and the people who are very good at the very bottom of that stack are very rare. I mean, hundreds of people like that in the world. And, the result is that you own it. I mean, one of Steve Jobs' great conclusions when he was running next after Apple is that the operating system was everything. And he was fortunate. He hired a brilliant guy named Avi Tevanian. And Avi came in and wrote the next operating system. And then everything that you run on Apple today is a derivative of the stuff that Avi did. And, because only the operating system, that is the key linchpin technology. But I'll tell you, there are a lot of people who didn't get it. There was a Fortune reporter who interviewed Bill Gates in 1999. And Gates was being cocky as he could be. And the reporter finally said, how can you be so self-confident that you're going to beat all of these other great CEOs that were out there? And he said, I understand software. They don't. He was right. I mean,
it's the knowledge of the shaman that knows how to do things, but he wants to keep the secret, kind of like the alchemist. Let's get a little bit more into the book. So the main title is The New Technology State. And I think that you painted already a pretty clear vision, although I'm sure you to go deeper in the book. But then, you talk about this idea of going from a dream state into a nightmarish state. But you also finish to say that maybe there is something we can do about it. So tell me a little bit about the structure of the book and where you start, and don't tell me the end, of course, but kind of like to give a teaser to what the book structure is, and maybe who you write it for as well, who you had in mind as an audience.
Well, there's sort of an overview, and I am an economist, so it talks about neoclassical economics and how that's become the linchpin in public policy in the country. And we did a lot of things that we thought we're going to do with, neoclassical economics. But neoclassical economics dates from the late 1700s. And tech was not, there wasn't any tech, right? And economic growth was very low. And the foundation of neoclassical economics comes from Ricardo and Adam Smith. And Smith wrote 2 books. And to your point of the podcast, the second book is The Wealth of Nations, which has the phrase "as if by an invisible hand," and is the one that says that free market economics works. But in his earlier book, Smith says that he believes that human beings want to be both loved and to be lovely, and that tempered capitalism because people wanted to be lovely. I'm not so sure that we have that ethic anymore, if we ever did. People may still want to be loved, but they now want to be rich. And the rich may be overpowering the lovely. So then I talk about something called Halstead length. And Halstead length goes back to a professor from Purdue, Maurice Halstead, who wondered in the 80s, why were some programmers 100 times better than others? And he then studied the human brain. And what he came up with is this concept of how large is a memory chunk. And the theory of the brain that works, whether it's completely true or not, I don't know. We can't, we don't know how to pull apart a brain yet. But that we store memory in chunks, and the chunks vary in size. And he came up with a bunch of really clever heuristics to measure size. And he found that for the average person, the size was a number that he labeled 250. And that turned out to be 50 lines of software. He found out that the very best programmers, that was in 65,000, hundreds of times longer. And so you think Beethoven or James Joyce or, the Aborigines in Australia who can tell you where every water hole is in the outback and how to get between them. The London cab driver who understands how to get you to any street address and had to be taking a test on it. It's all about Halstead length. And great Halstead length makes you a fantastic programmer because you understand the interactions and you're much faster and that means that there's a scarcity. And anytime there's a scarcity, there are economic rents. And that is what's happened, is that the tech companies have basically harvested up all of the people who are great programmers, that they get paid very well, but the companies get paid even better. And that's where it's come from. And then, I remember when Facebook started, I knew a lot of the people. I spent a lot of time with Sean Parker, random reasons. But when he introduced the social network, the feed into Facebook, they didn't really know what it was. And actually, one of my employees was the first to use it for business purposes and marketing. And he got, hundreds of thousands of people to sign up. And it was the first time, and then they shut it down, which they, should have. But I then go through how, if you look at the 2016 election, Trump spent $150 million in the last 3 weeks of the campaign in 5 counties. There are 3,000 plus counties in America. He spent that money on Facebook in 5 counties. And that's why he won. He won by 78,000 votes. And those votes came from those counties. And it was understanding how you could use data to target people. And what Trump did, which no one had ever done before because they couldn't, is he put out ads to discourage people from voting. He knew he wasn't going to convince someone to vote for him, but if he could convince the person not to vote at all, that was very effective. And so he ran ads primarily to Afro-Americans on Hillary Clinton's support of 3 strikes and you're outlaws. And he got the people not to vote. I mean, that's the margin in Detroit, the margin for Michigan. And it was a brilliant use of technology. And you know, the young guy that helped them do it was down in the polling headquarters in Texas, and he then repented because all his friends hated him, and he tried to help defeat Trump in 2020. But it was just this use of technology, and you know, it was pretty. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just he didn't have to say, "I'm Donald Trump and I paid for this message." And what you saw was a clip of Hillary Clinton urging 3 strikes and you're outlaws, which, you know, turned out to be a very racist effect on society. And he was able to do that. And, you know, people began to pay attention and look at it more. So, you know, it continues down this path of how people have found that having aggregated data, which then allows you to build algorithms, and you then apply the algorithms, you can then target messages, and that ends up being very effective, makes more money, or in the case of the Trump campaign, got you more positive votes. And so, you know, we tried. I mean, I re-engineered companies. I saved, you know, I did one project which we estimate made $1.4 billion for us over time. You know, remarkable gains in efficiency with tech. And, you know, even up until then, you know, really up until the 2010s, nobody ever looked at the negatives. It always was the positive, the great things you got: Google Maps, gaming, you know, the ability to have video conferences, the ability to do this. All of that seemed great. It's only in the last 10 years or so that we've begun to see, oh, wait a minute, there's a downside to all this. And, you know, we then had compensation schemes in place that allowed people to make enormous amounts of money. And in fact, it's tax advantaged because the tech companies are allowed to deduct from their taxes the actual income that the employee gets from a stock option, not then they don't have to take that out. So they give an option, and the option at grant is 0 because it's at the current market price. And then the market price goes up 20-fold. When the employee sells that option, converts the stock and sells it, they get to deduct the gain from their taxes without any cash expense. So effectively, it's a huge subsidy to companies to pay via stock. And then analysts starting in 2000 began to let them use, you know, non-GAAP earnings, where they would ignore stock compensation in reporting it, and it didn't show up. So you've got a whole bunch of little things compounding that make it very, very useful. In the 80s, Congress went against corporate pensions. And up until the 80s, if you were a CEO of a company, your biggest wealth was your corporate pension, which only was valuable if your company was healthy 10 years down the road to pay the pension. So you managed differently. But right. When we changed it, so the only way to have a retirement was to make wealth. The only way to get wealth was to get your stock price up and sell. Right. So you change the incentives on corporate management from, you know, harvesting maintaining the company and sustaining it for long-term growth to harvesting it, you know, pump and dump.
So you pretty much take your pension right away.
Yeah.
no matter how the company then goes.
No matter how the company does. And then you don't care what happens to the company after you retire.
Which is not very ethical if you think about it. So, right. So there is the people that own the technology, understand the technology. Then there is the people that understand the technology and use it, not necessarily being technologists, but as the example of politicians and right. example of people that play in the stock market. And then there is the rest of us, I'm going to put myself into that, where we use this technology, we have fun with it, we watch YouTube, TikTok, right. and all of that. And at the same time, we're being instrumentalized by those that understand. And so we see the top of the iceberg, which is white and shiny. And then there is the bottom of the iceberg, which is much, much bigger. And we have no idea what is under the stock. So the question comes to my mind, it probably is in the mind of the audience, the listener right now, which is, are we screwed, or is there something we can do about it? I'm thinking legislation, I'm thinking And I'm even thinking AI that you haven't even mentioned right now, but that's another big headache probably coming down the line. So is there hope?
I mean, there are a couple of things. Even the top of the iceberg has insidious effects, right? I mean, in the 50s, we were united because there were 3, 4, 5 television networks, and we all watched the same shows. We all had the same thing. You know, today, I mean, YouTube just reported that the majority of their viewing is on smart TVs. People aren't watching these unifying things. They're on YouTube watching individual shows. So we end up being, we don't have any unifying thing. I mean, people
like a common culture that unified us.
And that, I think, is very insidious. I mean, I talk to younger people and they all have my show. They all have a show that they're binging on watching, and they're not the same. I mean, and then one of the elements of friendship is you agree to watch their show. I mean, it's a interesting dynamic to me, who grew up on, broadcast television. In fact, in my case, the first TV I watched was all Canadian because I lived closer to Canada than to any US TV station. So I watched Canadian TV. The other thing is that we've turned our kids into answer seekers. Instead of knowing how to solve a problem, the first thing they do is they go to Google or Facebook or YouTube, which is also Google, and look for an answer. And if they don't find an answer, they're not sure what to do. AI is going to be a 10x on that, right? AI, already, I mean, I use Poe a lot, and I go to the various LLMs that are out there, and you get great answers. I mean, in general, they're better than you're going to get from search if it isn't current. I mean, because these AI engines aren't current. They only go through right now through last year. So I think that those two effects are very, very harmful. I'm not sure how to solve them. I mean, having only, and when everybody, you see a family go to a restaurant and sit down and they all pull out their devices and they sit there during the whole meal, all, they don't even talk. I don't know why you go out to a restaurant anyway. That's another thing. But, look, I'm a believer that competition is still the right answer. And there's no reason why Google needs to be one company. It could be many companies. There's no reason why Facebook needs to be one company. It could be several companies. And I think the world's better off if we have that. I think if we have more companies. So the one radical thing that I propose is that we tax market capitalization, and that companies that are bigger than, I said, $100 billion have to begin to pay an annual tax for having a market cap above 100 billion. It basically is market enforced antitrust. Make the companies break themselves up. Instead of aggregating so that we have a handful of huge companies, let's have a universe of 10 times as many, and let the companies do it in a way that's shareholder friendly. I'm not trying to take wealth away from anybody. In fact, I think there would be more wealth generated this way. I certainly, would change the tax incentives that favor the dynamic of allowing the big tech companies to get this huge tax break by paying their favorite programmers a lot of money and then getting a tax break for it rather than actually paying for it. So I think there's a set of taxes we could do that not necessarily to raise revenue, but to drive behavior and go make that. I mean, there's a simple suggestion is to allow the post office to postmark emails for a very small sum. Because if you had postmarked email, you could set your email system to reject it if it wasn't postmarked, unless it was an address you knew. And it would then cost money to send political emails or unsolicited things, which today is relatively costless, and force people to make a decision. And I think that even a tiny amount, the day before the Georgia Senate runoff in December of last year, I got 500 emails soliciting money from both Democrats and Republicans. They were all alike. They all had fear because fear is profitable. The problem is technology has made fear the most profitable way to get it. You don't get money by putting out a reasoned analysis. You get money by sending out a appeal that goes to your emotion, that goes to fear.
Yep.
And as long as that is the way to make money, then that is the way politics is going to go. And so you have to address that. Now, I think that politicians would like doing this? No. I don't have much hope that this would ever get enacted. But I mean, I got 500 emails in one day, and about 300 from one party, 200 from another, but it didn't matter. And they were all just very, very fear. If this happens, this is what, the world. And, you can't, we've made fear the optimal strategy. That means we're divided.
In a lot of industries too. I mean, politics is certainly true, and it's more true than ever, although it's always been a very strong argument to be fearful. I have fear of the enemy, whatever that enemy is.
Sex sells. It's the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. But so your point, and we're going to start wrapping here, about breaking this larger company into minor one. Do you think this will help to create more transparency and of course, and healthier competition, but also more transparency so that the educator, the parents, the politicians can really start to understand what has been so secretive right now? I mean, is that the idea? Because I can see that to be one of the things. Like, if you have a huge castle, it's easy to build walls around it, but the smaller the castle is, the more you can fly over it. You
get more innovation. You get more. You get more decisions that are there. And if you go to a venture capitalist today and say, "I've got this great startup, and we're going to compete against Facebook," they say, "Gee, it's great to see you. Time's up." Because they don't believe you can attack them. And so you get more innovation, you get more variety, you get more diversity. I mean, there used to be, but you need interoperability between them. And as long as they have these big castles, they don't have any interoperability. And that, and you see this struggle that all these sites have, even Discord. It's just very hard to compete against the monoliths.
And sorry, you're an economist, so I look more at the societal thing, but this idea that sometimes you then develop something, but your competitors coming up, you just go and swallow it and buy it. So you're worried is that it doesn't matter. You have enough money to say, well, the new thing is not going to hurt me, but it's actually going to benefit me because I'm going to put it under my umbrella. And again, you're just building bigger and bigger and bigger. So, do you have hope that that the U.S. are going to move in this direction?
Well, certainly, there are a lot of politicians that are nervous. I'm afraid that they're lawyers, and lawyers think that they should regulate. And I've had my encounters with regulators over the years, and they're just, they get paid a fraction of what the big tech giants pay. They are just not. The better teams are always on the other side. And if you go to Washington and you ask people, they're talking about regulating AI, and I listen to the conversation, and they go, "You don't have any idea." Or I saw a task force. I looked at the names on there and I looked at their resumes. There wasn't one person on the task force that even knew what a stablecoin was or how Bitcoin worked or where it went. The government's always going to be behind. So what regulation does is regulation builds barriers to entry for your competitors. And so you'd love to be regulated once you've won, because that's another barrier that keeps competition away. So they're all favoring regulation. We have the Graham Warren bill to create a digital commission. I'm sorry that, I think one of the worries that we have to have as a country is that China's run by engineers for the most part. We're run by lawyers. And in the longer term, engineers win. Lawyers worry about dividing the pie. not about growing it. And that's a challenge, and tech isn't going to stop.
No.
It's not going to stop at all.
Yep. All right. So before I close with the name of the book and then many other things, I like to leave you a couple of minutes to just make a pitch for the book and who you have in mind as your audience. It seems like you're going deeper into economics and politics, so you hopefully everybody will read it. Of course, that's the dream of every author. But do you have some target audience that you think they'll be more affected by and benefit by reading the book?
Well, I think I was very strongly motivated by John Kenneth Galbraith. He was very good to me when I worked with him years ago, 50 years ago, and he was very prescient in seeing how the world went. And so this book tries to mimic, in some ways, the new industrial state and being a more general view. But I also admit that it's at least a medium lift, because it's talking about a very complex issue and trying to explain how we got to where we are. And it's not one simple thing. It's not, there isn't one thing that you go and flip a bit and now the problem goes away. We have engineered this through lots of policies and through, history that's gotten us to where we have these global monopolies that are there. The idea in 2002, 2003, if you had 100,000 users, boy, that was a success. Today, there are multiple sites that have over 4 billion. You think of that, Pope Mark, or, it's such a change. So what I hope, that there's going to be some classroom use, I assume, that people in studying economic history or political science on how do you regulate change. But I really wrote it much in the tradition of Galbraith and, in his honor, to try and educate the public at large as how we got to where we are. And, nobody did anything wrong. I make the point repeatedly that no one did anything wrong other than maximize profits.
Right.
And we just created a set of incentives that have gotten us here. And if we don't change those incentives, we won't change it. And as long as we leave the incentives in place, this is where we're going to be.
Yep. And I think you said something that we all agree when we talk about technology, which is not going to be stopped, but we can't kind of try to direct it and to regulate it again. I'm definitely with you in that. So this is the end of this, Bill. I really thank you so much for being on it. For all the audience, the book is The New Technology State, on how our digital dreams became societal nightmares and what we can do about it. Is going to come out on September 12th, 2023. I'm going to put all the links in the notes for the show on how to get in touch with Bill and whatever he wants to share, resources up to you. And everybody else, I'm definitely, as a doctor in political science, as interested in technology, I'm definitely going to read it. So, Bill, I'm looking forward to that. And again, thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.